listening to a podcast from The Word.
Mark, I feel we ought to talk about gym pumps because it's a subject that we've glossed over too many times in the past.
We've almost totally ignored athleisure, as I believe this new market area is described. But no, yeah, come on, we're both experts. You start. Gym pumps.
Gym pumps. Gym pumps are apparently made by firms called Nike and Adidas. And do they still have Dunlop, Green Flash, and so forth, Mark? Do they still have Slazzies and so forth, as they probably had when you and I were in that stage? Do you still own? Do you own a pair of gym pumps, Mark? I have to know.
Well, I do actually. Yeah, I do. Well, I'm very rarely worn, of course, but apart from for cycling, for long distance cycling, I do. Do you have a pair?
I always feel if a man's got beyond the age of 40 and he has more than one pair of gym pumps, he ought to have a serious word with himself, really. It's all right if you're younger, but anyway.
There's a mate of mine who has a pair of trainers called pub trainers, just for wearing in a pub. They kind of look a bit sporty, but you're never going to take any exercise. And that's half the thing about gym pumps, isn't it? It's people buying shoes that make them look active when they're not active. They're actually sitting around drinking beer and watching the telly. What's
that old Billy Connolly joke about something wrong with his feet? They wouldn't walk past pubs. Somehow I'm reminded of that. Anyway, the point about this story is Kanye West. And so a few years ago, Adidas came to the conclusion that the only way they were going to make up the significant gap in the market between them and the market leader Nike was to enter into a partnership with a high-profile popular culture celebrity like Kanye West.
Because Nike had done it with Michael Jordan, hadn't they? And Nike now own 50% of the market, and Adidas had only 8%, I think. And so they thought they wanted an edgy superstar, didn't they?
Well, so they signed Kanye West, and they got themselves an edgy superstar, didn't they? But first of all, they set to work, or Kanye set to work, designing said gym pumps, didn't he? With considerable success. And so the ones that were launched were an absolute phenomenal success in the marketplace, weren't they? People simply, and you and I think there are obviously a million and one things that mark us out as old gits, but I think nothing more significant than the fact that we think popular music is important. Well, it's nothing like as important as gym pumps nowadays, is it?
Well, no, because Kanye West had said that he wanted to be an anchor in $1 trillion company, which is why he signed up, wasn't it? And as far as I can see, he was earning, I want to say, something in the region of $100 million a year.
He was guaranteed.
Guaranteed $100 million.
Just think about that, listeners, for a moment. There is nowhere else, not in movies, certainly not in music, where you could be guaranteed that kind of sum of money every year. That Kanye West was guaranteed by Adidas under the terms of this deal.
That puts the music industry in perspective.
It's
where Rihanna has made most of her money. It's not through selling records.
No, absolutely. I think it applies to most of these people.
Yeah,
Beyonce and so forth. It's fragrances, it's lingerie, it's whatever.
But then you can see that when he designed that shoe, there were huge sales. And as far as I can see, they retail for about, is it $350?
Yeah, I'm sure.
So if it's $350 a pair, then you can see there is going to be an absolutely monumental profit margin.
It's a fair amount of fat in that, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
That's how they afford to pay for the marketing, which justifies the price, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? And, but anyway, what they discovered quite early on in the relationship with Kanye was that he was a somewhat volatile business partner. And they couldn't always rely on the smooth running of meetings and liaison between themselves and Kanye.
I don't know what kind of detail we're going to go into, but I mean, there was meetings where he presented them with his designs and they didn't like them, and he started drawing swastikas on the shoes. Was that right?
There you go.
So and used language they thought was unacceptable, and then they did this deal with them, didn't they? They thought this might go wrong, so they're going to renegotiate the contract and put into it a clause about the fact that if he was convicted of felony, a felony conviction, a bankruptcy, a substance abuse treatment case or whatever, then that would be cause for them to end the relationship. And then, of course, they went on to have even more success. And then he was even more preposterous, wasn't he, and appalling in his behavior.
Unbelievably so.
I mean, let's not get into any kind of details, but it was just all that kind of anti-Semitic stuff. And at that stage, he wanted to call his album Hitler, didn't he? He told one of the Jewish CEOs of Adidas that he should get a portrait of Hitler to hang in his kitchen to help him learn about unconditional love. So this is a very, very difficult. Now we're skimming the surface here. Very,
absolutely.
Very difficult. But the interesting thing is that the more they fell out and the more successful they were, the more Adidas threw money at it. They renegotiated the contract and then wanted to offer him an additional $100 million a year on top of what he was earning. So, I mean, what do we learn from all this, Dave?
Well, I tell you what, a number of interesting things. They've kind of dissolved the relationship, haven't they?
Yeah.
Recently. But apparently, what intrigues me is they've got in a warehouse somewhere, and I envisage the warehouse pretty much like the one that you see at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, into which they are delivering the Ark in a packing case. Yeah. It's kind of utterly endless, and it's occupied by $300 million worth of Kanye designed shoes, which they can't decide what to do with. Really, they can't be seen to put them on the market under the current conditions. But you can't help thinking that in 10 years' time, there'll be 10 chief executives down the pike by then, won't they? And then somebody will go, we've still got that warehouse full of Kanye designed pumps out in Arkansas. Well, why don't we just release them onto the market as special, limited edition?
Yeah, this is the kind
vintage
of bootleg series anthology.
$1,000 a time, per shoe. You know what I mean? That's what will happen. But the other interesting thing is that Adidas had to kind of withdraw from it because they couldn't be seen to be in cahoots with a man who was so clearly beyond the pale in all aspects of his behavior. And yet, there was no indication that the public buying the shoes had any problem with it at all.
They didn't mind at all.
That's the thing. They didn't mind at all.
I thought that was really.
Now, it used to be that companies used to say, "Now we can't get into bed with somebody who's too controversial because if it blows back, people will blame us." You know what I mean? Well, they're not doing that anymore. Adidas can't be seen to doing it in the world of business. Fair enough. But the public don't have any trouble with it at all.
They don't have any trouble. I mean, it got them what they wanted. Because Adidas got them the attention they wanted. They got them the association, the edginess. But I mean, I got the impression that A, image is completely kind of pivotal, and B, people are so blinded by this idea of celebrity and their desire for celebrity, they were prepared to overlook all sorts of things and just go, it's Kanye being Kanye. And I'm absolutely staggered that people didn't seem to be affected by it, but they weren't.
The other thing is that you can't help thinking, and as you read about this story, and the extraordinary story of Kanye West in the last few years. You and I used to work on Smash Hits and Q and so forth, and the whole idea of is the wide world of popular music. You have all kinds of people. You have stable people, you have wobbly people, and you have people over there. We used to commonly say they're barking mad.
Yeah,
and nowadays you can't. obviously you can't say that anymore, can you? You know what I mean? But they're dealing with somebody in Kanye West who is mentally ill. It's evident.
Yeah, obviously. That's sad, I think. He's obviously very, very, very destabilized, isn't he? And not quite in control.
But he's still kind of operating, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's making a comeback album and so forth, and it will, the goalposts will be moved for him, won't they?
Yeah, they will.
When he does that, And I just don't know. I don't know how you deal with popular music in this new world where, where even the kind of, the most apparently stable performer or whatever, people will withdraw from a tour because they won't say it's strain or whatever they would have said in the past. They'll say, I'm worried about my mental health.
Yeah.
And
the moment you say that, everyone goes, oh, okay, then that's fine. Absolutely fine.
It's sort of understandable in the sense
completely.
that, that for years, people have kind of volunteered to put themselves in situations where it's very difficult to keep your mental health intact, I would imagine. You know what I mean? If you're Harry Styles actually, the likes of Harry Styles and Taylor Swift seemed like extraordinary stable individuals. That's the impression you get, but the level of adulation and success just gets greater all the time, and intrusion. How you run.
I was reading a book the other day about the Eagles, and Don Henley was talking about how just regularly people would be turning up at his house and at their office, claiming that they were married to him, that they had children by him or whatever, that they had some relationship. He said it's just so much of his life was just bogged down by dealing with these absolute lunatics.
Yeah.
And you think, how do you manage to kind of keep sane and make records and function under those kind of circumstances? I just have no idea.
Yeah. And you do wonder if in the future people will be still volunteering to live that kind of life the way they have done in the past, because everybody must go into it nowadays with their eyes open, mustn't they? In the sense that they see the pressures, they see the fallout, they see the
which they didn't used to. They only used to see the champagne and the Rolls Royces.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. Rod Stewart, that looks like 100% a brilliant time.
Yes, it does.
I mean, what can possibly? I think I'd like to be a pop star. He's a very good investment. But one has to take on board that. It's like the fallout of the Beatles. The more you read about the four Beatles after the Beatles split, the more you realize they went through all sorts of misery trying to kind of get over it. In fact, did they ever fully get over it, any of them?
I don't think you can.
Can't get over it, no.
It's funny you say about Rod Stewart because that was the whole act, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This is brilliant. It's all wonderful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you ever recall an interview with Rod Stewart over a long, long period of time where he said, well, I'm a bit depressed. I'm a bit blue. Not ever. I don't remember that. It may have.
Rod's whole thing was just reminding you of the trappings of success.
Yeah.
Just, I've got this and you haven't. There's loads of money, actually.
Yeah, more trappings. More trappings.
I went out, when the second issue of Q went out to interview him in Milan. And the first thing he did at lunchtime was to go out and buy a watch, which I think he spent £15,000 or £20,000 on, which doesn't seem that much now. But at the time, in 1986, to spend £20,000 on a watch for no reason at all, just because you can. And he did it, I think, deliberately to kind of impress me and to wrong foot me, whatever sarky little questions I might have as a kind of ex-NME journalist about Rod Stewart and what Rod Stewart represents would be undermined by the fact that I've just bought a £20,000 watch and you haven't, with Kelly Emberg on his arm,
He probably took it back to the Milan branch of H. Samuel the day after you'd gone and got his money back.
It was only on loan, that's right.
It's only on loan.
Dear.
There you go. Kanye West, gym pumps. Where will it all end?
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
60 years ago, pretty much today, actually, With the Beatles came out. And it struck me that of all the things that were really significant about that record, and there were lots, the turning point in the compositions, All I Gotta Do, songs like that by John Lennon, his kind of Motown pastiche, All My Loving, fantastic. And the thing that really struck me was the cover. The cover really changed the game, because up until then, broadly, the covers of pop records were kind of, like the cover of the first Beatles album, actually, weren't they? They were kind of chirpy pictures of the people on the front, the people playing the songs who you didn't really get the impression ever possibly written them, but they were just the pop acts, and it was called for all very upbeat and fabulous. And that Robert Freeman, who took that picture, they said to him, "Can you?" And he was a fashion photographer, wasn't he? He wasn't a kind of pop photographer. It's from the fashion world. And they said, "Can you have a look at?" And he'd done all sorts of pictures of John Coltrane and stuff. He said, "Look at these pictures that Astrid Kirchherr took of us, and look at we want some of that atmosphere." And they want the pictures of them in kind of half shadow, and they're not smiling. And they're really artfully arranged, aren't they? And it's got an atmosphere to it. And I think it's extraordinary because it says this is a major change between, the idea, this was a combination of them as kind of authentic British rock and roll stars with an element of that kind of bohemian European kind of, art house cool that they had before. And it just sort of said, we're not kind of grinning, kind of eager to please pop stars desperate for your attention and custom. We've got this kind of confidence, and that we write these songs ourselves, etc. The worst example of this, although it was actually, 3 years later still, was Pop Sound. It was Pet Sounds, wasn't it? Actually, no, it was 2 years later. When did Pet Sounds come out? 66?
66.
66.
Yeah.
See, Pet Sounds, one of the worst covers ever, in my view. Don't you think? One of the most unrepresentative covers.
Odd.
And, they did to the Beach Boys what EMI had done to the Beatles for their first album, which is, right, lads, go out for 20 minutes somewhere, we'll find a location with a snapper, with a smudge.
You know the story. You know the story of the first album cover, because it's worth telling this. So they need to do a first album cover, and Brian Epstein, being theatrical, having gone to RADA, he contacts Britain's top theatrical photographer. It was a chap called Angus McBean.
Oh, yeah.
It was a rather grand figure. Used to taking pictures of John Gielgud and Donald Wolfett and so forth. And Angus meets them by appointment in reception at EMI, Manchester Square. And he doesn't have a lot of time to do it. They don't have a studio booked. So he says, "Tell you what, gentlemen, just go up onto the first floor landing and look over." And then he lies on his back in reception and he takes like 6 pictures and goes, "That's fine.
We've got it.
We've got it." And he had got it. Of course, that was the picture that they then returned, however many years later, 6 years later, to reprise for what was supposed to be the cover of Get Back, wasn't it?
It was, and was eventually used on the
same cover that the Sex Pistols posed in the same place, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And Blur did it too.
Yeah. But of course, the other thing about the obvious thing about second Beatles album cover is, and the thing that made it really exceptional at the time, I'm pretty sure, is black and white.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you had a budget to have color, why would you not have color? Because color was kind of everything that music was supposed to be, everything that pop music was supposed to be, which was bright and appealing and modern and, all those things. Whereas this was an attempt to do
major state
to do something
incredible.
So I've told you the story about With the Beatles that Christmas in our house. So 1963 Christmas, my sister and I got With the Beatles between us as our present. You couldn't have it on your own, obviously. The record on your own, for goodness sake. whatever it was, 32 and 6. It was probably 28 and something. I can't remember. And we played it. And my Uncle Stan, who wasn't really an uncle, but anyway, they used to visit us on Christmas Day or around Christmas. And Uncle Stan was a bit of a Frank Sinatra-style hipster. And so he used to enjoy pulling my leg about popular music and the Shadows and whatever. And so he said, what have you got? What record have you got? And I showed him this, and he looked at it, and he said, I'm going to come back next year, and I tell you what, you'll have completely forgotten about this lot. And the poor bloke came
Uncle
back.
Stan, here we are 60 years later, almost to the day, still talking about them. I'll never get tired of it.
I'm sorry, it's true.
I know. The other thing I used to say this to my kids a lot of the time when they weren't being very active. We used to talk about the work rate. I used to mention the Beatles and work rate. I mean, we know the first album was recorded in a day, but the second album, it's the second album. On the 30th of July, 1963, Dave. I looked this up this morning. This is what they recorded, okay? They recorded and finished Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes. They started It Won't Be Long, which they also finished later on in the day. So that's 2 songs completely done. They did Till There Was You. They did Money. Money was just overdubs, actually. They finished Till There Was You. They did Chuck Berry's Roll Over Beethoven. And they also recorded All My Loving. But that's 5 songs. But at lunchtime, they went down to Portland Place to record a session for Saturday Club. And they recorded Long Tall Sally, She Loves You, Glad All Over, Twist and Shout, You Really Got a Hold on Me, and I'll Get You.
In the middle of the day.
And they went back to the studio. Yeah, so in the same day.
So let's get this straight. They were at Abbey Road in the morning kind of thing. And then they said, all right.
So their lunch break, while everyone else was saying...
No, hold on a second. Hold on. So Mel Evans had to put all the stuff, take apart the drum kit, put it in the back of the van, yes? They go in the... Well, they would have gone in the car, probably. But Mel would have had to drive it down to Portland Place. Find a place to park.
Yeah.
Was it Portland Place? It wouldn't be...
I would have thought so, wasn't it?
Not made available. It might have been
Club. Maybe it was made available.
It might have made... Well, whatever. You'd have to go there. You'd have to park. You'd have to unload. You'd have to get everything set up. Then they'd have to come in, tune up, whatever, get a sound, and then do how many songs?
They did 6 songs. Recorded 6 songs in their entirety. Probably just one take each, I'm sure. Yeah. But then, this is while everyone else at the session at Abbey Road is having a bottle of Newcastle Brown and a pork pie. And then they come back from that and carry on. And so they finish up recording and working on a lot of other songs too, recording completely 5 whole new tracks. I still think it's absolutely staggering, especially as you think how many times you've heard those. How many times have you heard All My Loving? Or Till There Was You, really complicated songs like Till There Was You. Astonishing.
It is.
I think it's fantastic.
It is. So that's 60 years ago.
60 years ago.
This is a junction in the Word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So Cher, in other piping hot news, Cher is coming to London in a few weeks' time to promote it. I think it's her 27th album.
27th. And that's 27 on her own, presumably. There'll be a lot more if you added in Sonny and Cher.
I can't remember a world without Cher.
I can't. They were a genuine phenomenon in the mid-'60s.
Yeah.
They came to Britain and they spent a lot of time in Britain. They always seemed to be spending a lot of time in Britain. They all seemed to be on the telly because nobody had seen anything like them. And they were the kind of trailblazers in Britain for what became hippies, really. Yeah. You know, the whole idea of Sonny Bono.
Sonny Bono with his shaggy jacket, that coat he used to wear. Do you remember that? And his haircut too, that kind of bowl cut that grew longer.
That song, Laugh at Me, you know what I mean? That, I'm a bit of a victim of society's disapproval. You know, it's not true at all. Sonny Bono was a kind of Hollywood hack. He'd been around for years, you know, co-written Needles and Pins and all this kind of stuff, mate of Phil Spector's and all this. But Cher was this kind of taller, beautiful, younger wife, and they were this vision of it was a new world of kind of marital bliss, wasn't it? That Sonny and Cher offered. It was it was like Richard Bryars and Prunella Scales, but without the suburbia, wasn't it? You know what I mean? That you could live this life of domestic bliss on a scatter cushion in Laurel Canyon and so forth, sitting there, listening to your wind chimes and composing tunes.
Yeah, there'd be a hammock somewhere nearby. Pulse foods, things we'd never heard of.
And of course,
scented candles.
They were huge. And then they famously split up. And he famously went off and eventually became a Republican. Was he a senator? He was senator.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
Congress, yeah, which is just absolutely extraordinary. And actually, the two of them then became absolute prime time stars of American television. Didn't they? In the 70s, the Sonny and Cher show, where she would appear in each show in some more extraordinary costume, generally designed by a chap called Bob Mackie, who specialised in doing the most revealing, costumes for Cher. And
also had an echo of First Nation about her, didn't she?
Oh yes,
very exciting at the time.
But still, my most treasured memory of Cher is, let's go back to the year 1989. I don't even remember when she was doing a series of singles that had been kind of masterminded, I think, by Jim Steinman, the kind of sub-meatloaf things. And they're all very good in their way. And the one I remember with most fondness is If I Could Turn Back Time, which is a classic tune for somebody like Cher to be doing. Yeah. And she decided, it was decided that the most appropriate video frame in which to showcase this particular extraordinarily overblown tune would be on the deck of a battleship, an American battleship.
Yes.
Moored on the Hudson, I think. Yeah, on the Hudson in New York. And so she appears there, surrounded by sailors. It always works, doesn't it?
It works, though, doesn't it?
A half-naked woman surrounded by sailors. Sailors wearing kind of tropical kit, that kind of whites that they adopt in really sunny climes, not in New York.
Force's favourite. Yeah.
Force's favourite. And at one stage, and she was wearing one of those extraordinary costumes, which is beyond abbreviation, where they kind of, it appears to have a kind of cheese wire making its way through her nether regions, covering her modesty. It's just absolutely amazing. And at one stage, in case we hadn't sufficiently got the point of the phallic nature of, flouncing around on the deck of a battleship, she actually poses astride a naval gun. Yep. Astride a naval gun. Let's be clear about this. And who is playing the lead guitar solo on that video?
I'm pretty sure it's her son, Elijah Blue Allman.
How old was Elijah Blue Allman on that occasion?
15 or something like that, would he?
12, Mark.
No,
12.
no.
He is
That's
12.
Fantastic.
It's the most mum moment you've ever.
It's embarrassing. No. Will you catch cold? Yeah. Oh, Christ.
The greatest nightmare of a 12-year-old boy ought to be having to appear, miming the guitar solo with his mother
thrashing about on a gun barrel.
On a naval gun. wearing an outfit from Fredericks of Hollywood. But that is Cher. And so when did I say that was? 1989?
89.
So, So, what is it? 30, it's more than 30 years later. She's still at it, isn't she? So Cher was
I love her for it.
Didn't she supposedly retire a few years ago and then just kept doing it, didn't she? I think she did.
I'm pretty sure she did. She started
this is the last time around. This is the last time I'm going to do this. I'm going to go out there and just give the boys in the back room what the boys want. Give them the old hits. And it was such a success. She did it in Las Vegas. Then she toured it. Then she took it back to Las Vegas, and she's touring it again.
Who can blame her?
No, absolutely.
There's that old gag, is there, about the end of the world? When the world melts down in some terrible kind of nuclear explosion, all will be left with some particularly hardy species of insects. And Cher, because Cher is comprised almost entirely from non-natural body parts. There it is.
The word podcast. Clearly, there is no plan.
So there's a brilliant story this week about a Drake track. I'm sure you were following this, called IDGAF, I Don't Give a Fuck, which starts with a kind of spacey incantation of a woman's voice going, traveling forever in the darkness into blackness. And this was a sample from a 1977 album track called The Tunnel, from an album by the group Azimuth. And it appears on Drake's new album, For All the Dogs. And so far, that track has got 127 million plays on Spotify. So it's doing all right. But the person whose voice it is, it's just such a good story, really. She's an 82-year-old jazzer living in Deal in Kent, and just got a call a few months ago from Drake's people saying, would it be all right if we use this sample? So she turns to her son, who's the drummer of with Hot Chip, and says, "I don't know who Drake is." He says, "Mum, go along with it. Seriously."
Yes. The answer is yes.
This is a genuinely really good thing that's happening.
Mum say yes.
I know. And it's just such a great story because she's kind of got quite an interesting career. She's a lot of those people who post Instagram things, records now playing, tend to kind of like her kind of stuff. She's a real kind of crate diggers classic, and some of the old albums fetch about £2,000 on eBay. But she was part of these various improvisational jazz groups, and it just, I love the idea. We've talked about this so many times, that the internet means that nothing is ever forgotten. And then also there are those possibilities for huge paydays that you just never dreamed of. So there it is. What is that? Nearly 60 years later. So over 50 years later.
Were we talking to? We were talking to Bernie Marsden, weren't we?
Yeah.
Not that long ago. Sadly, Bernie passed away a few months ago, and Bernie he'd written a song when he was in Whitesnake, or he co-written a song.
Yeah.
Which then, after he'd left Whitesnake, the reformed Whitesnake did it again. It was a huge hit, and so it meant he always got a check. And we were talking to him about it. He said, "Yeah, it's mailbox money. It's the best money in the world. Mailbox money.
Mailbox money.
It's just the stuff you're not expecting. It just turns up, and there's so many cases of this. And if you take a song like Every Breath You Take, which obviously was a huge hit for the Police, but was probably a bigger hit when it was sampled by this P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, wasn't it? I can't remember what, but it was. It was, it was even bigger because the paydays just get bigger all the time. And Phil Manzanera, again, who we were talking to on Word in Your Ear, a year or so ago, he one of his old he made an album called K-Scope, which did nothing. But
Jay-Z and Kanye West sampled it.
One of his old licks just got sampled on No Church in the Wild. And he said at the time that he was owed 6 figures, he felt. I don't know if he ever made it. He said, but that's more than he made in 15 years in Roxy Music.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
That's the way it is.
I love that.
So here's the possibility.
Enya as well was, I think the the Fugees' Ready or Not has got a huge amount of
good.
Enya on it, and she makes I can't remember what percentage of the royalties she gets, like a huge amount. But the thing is, don't give up. And I tell you who else we talked about. The Madonna song. Do you remember Madonna?
Oh, Ray of Light, yeah.
Ray of Light.
The guys from
song.
well, they used it from oh god, I've forgotten the name of the two guys. Curtis Muldoon, Dave Curtis and Clive Muldoon were former members of Bodas. Used to be in a band group of Bodas with Steve Howe, and they made a record on Purple, Deep Purple's label. Did nothing at all. But one of them died, and Clive Muldoon died. Dave Curtis kind of retired from the business, and but Clive Muldoon's niece was Christine Leach, who worked with William Orbit, and she played William Orbit a little tape from this Curtis Muldoon record made in 1971, I think. Disappear Without Trace, and he sampled it, and then was working with Madonna on Ray of Light, and so the line out Ray of Light, I feel like I've just been born, came from that Curtis Muldoon record in 1971. So they ended up, well, Dave Curtis did, and Clive Muldoon's estate widow, whatever, did. Ended up making a fortune.
I love that. I love stories like that.
Yeah,
I mean, Norma Winston's not kind of forgotten. She's had a reasonably successful career, and
absolutely, it's a name I knew.
Very well admired.
But listen, isn't that a fantastic bonus? Isn't that a wonderful thing?
It is.
To happen to somebody in the, what is she, 82?
She's 82.
82. I'm sorry, at the end of a long career in music, which will no doubt have contained more than its share of completely hand-to-mouth periods. That can happen. It can happen, It doesn't happen to everybody, although it could be, in the fullness of time on the kind of monkeys and typewriters principle. It might happen,
Yeah.
Anybody's tune could get picked up, just hope it's in your lifetime.
No, because before, if your career was over, your kind of career felt over. And you couldn't imagine it would ever get resurrected,
But okay, here's a question, and I don't expect you to know the answer, but somebody listening out there might know the answer. What was the first sample? What was the first case of sampling? Because nobody did it in the 60s, did they? Nobody did it in the 50s.
Yeah.
It must have started in the 70s.
I have absolutely no idea. Well, it's certainly, Grandmaster Flash, 1982, etc. There would have been samples on those records. But
things like, Fab Five Freddy and all those kind of things, they're late 70s, aren't they?
Yeah.
So does it start with hip hop, or was anybody doing it before? I'm not aware. If you happen to know, get in touch.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.